Captain Eric Daniels looked out over the barren landscape. The planet they had landed on, Veyron 6, was desolate, scarred by war, with cities reduced to ruins and the air thick with smoke. The mission was simple: deliver supplies to a resistance. Group fighting against the oppressive Valorians, a highly advanced alien species that had conquered this world. But as Eric gazed across the broken terrain, he wondered if the humans could ever win this war. The Valorians were ruthless, skilled in both battle and strategy. Eric was part of a small human squad tasked with providing aid to the local resistance. But things had gone wrong from the start. A surprise ambush had left most of the squad dead. Now it was just Eric and his fellow soldier, Corporal Mia Carrington, left alive. They had managed to make their way deep into the ruins, hoping to link up with the remaining resistance fighters. But so far, no luck. They moved cautiously through the wreckage of a crashed Valorian ship. The once sleek, intimidating craft now lay in pieces, its advanced weapons systems silenced, its hull blackened from explosions. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in the background. Another battle was raging, but it seemed far from them. Eric's mind raced as he thought about their next move. Mia was a skilled fighter, but even she couldn't hold off the entire Valorian fleet alone. They needed to find the resistance, and fast. They had no time to waste. As they ventured deeper into the ship's wreckage, Eric's foot caught on something soft. He stumbled and looked down, his heart skipping a beat. Beneath a pile of twisted metal and debris, a figure lay hidden. It was an alien woman, her skin a pale shade of blue, her features sharp and regal. She wore a damaged suit of armor, and her breathing was shallow. Blood stained her clothes. "Help!" Mia shouted, rushing forward. She knelt beside the alien woman, inspecting her injuries. "She's still alive!" Eric hesitated, his mind racing. The Valorians were the enemy, but this woman wasn't wearing the usual black armor of the military. She seemed different, wounded and vulnerable, not at all the terrifying warrior he had been trained to fight. "We can't leave her here," Mia said, her voice calm but urgent. "If she dies, we might lose a valuable ally." Eric stared down at the alien. He could feel her pain and fear, something he hadn't expected from an enemy warrior. Against all his instincts, he knew they had to help her. He reached down, carefully lifting the woman into his arms. She was light, though her armor added some weight. Her skin was cold to the touch, and Eric's heart beat faster as he realized how much danger they were in. Helping an enemy was a risk, one he was willing to take, even if it meant putting his own life in danger. As he moved through the wreckage, he noticed that Mia kept a wary eye on their surroundings, ever ready for an ambush. But Eric couldn't help focusing on the woman in his arms. She was beautiful, in an otherworldly way. Her sharp features, silver eyes, and the slight curve of her lips were unlike anything he had ever seen. There was something regal about her, even in her broken state. "What's your name?" Eric whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of distant gunfire. "Can you hear me?" The alien woman stirred slightly, her silver eyes opening to reveal a deep sadness. She looked up at him, but her gaze was confused. For a moment, Eric felt as if they were both trapped in a moment of time, suspended between the war and something deeper, something human, something real. Her voice was weak, her accent strange. "Aurelis," she whispered, her breath rattling in her chest. "Aurelis of the Valorian Empire. Aurelis," Eric repeated softly, as if the name itself was a whisper of something important. Mia frowned, but she said nothing. They needed to get Aurelis to safety, and fast. Without another word, Eric carried her toward the distant edge of the wreckage. Mia took point, her weapon at the ready as she scanned the surroundings. Aurelis's eyes fluttered again, this time with more strength. She managed to speak a little louder. Why help me?" Her voice was filled with a mix of confusion and something deeper, almost as if she couldn't believe he would. "You're human. I'm your enemy." Eric didn't have an immediate answer. Instead, he simply looked at her and said, "I said you're brave and beautiful. No one deserves to die alone in a wreck like this." Aurelius's silver eyes widened, and a tremor ran through her body. Her lips parted, and for the first time since Eric had found her, she let out a soft sob, a sound so quiet that Eric almost didn't hear it. Aurelius, a warrior princess of the Valorian Empire, began to cry. She sobbed quietly in Eric's arms, like a child who had lost everything. She wept for the war she was trapped in, for the people she had lost, for the choices she had made. She wept for the simple kindness Eric had shown her, something she had never known in her life, even as a leader of her people. Eric was taken aback. He had expected anger, confusion, or even resistance, but not this. Aurelius's tears were like a silent confession, a cry for the lost humanity that had been buried under years of war and duty. He didn't know what to say. All he could do was hold her gently, not as an enemy, but as someone in need. In that moment, he realized that they were no longer just enemies in a war. They were two people caught in the same storm, struggling to survive. Mia glanced back, her expression unreadable. She didn't understand Eric's decision, but she didn't argue. They had no time to waste, but in that brief moment, Eric's heart told him that this decision, this choice to help the alien woman, was the right one. Together, they carried Aurelius toward safety, the war fading into the background as the bonds between them began to form. Eric and Mia carried Aurelius through the wreckage, moving as quickly as they could without attracting attention. Every step felt like a race against time. They had to get her to safety before the Valorian forces found them. The pain in Aurelius's eyes was clear, but she had stopped crying. Her breathing was shallow and her body trembled from the effort to stay conscious. They reached a small, hidden cave beneath the wreckage of an old building. It was quiet and hidden from the chaos outside. Mia quickly began to set up a temporary medical area, using the supplies they had managed to carry with them. Eric laid Aurelius gently on the ground, making sure she was comfortable. "She needs rest," Mia said, glancing at Eric. "We don't have much time. We have to move again soon." Eric nodded, but kept his eyes on Aurelius. He wasn't sure why, but something about her made him want to protect her. She wasn't the enemy he had imagined. She was different. Aurelius's silver eyes opened slowly, and she looked up at Eric. Her gaze was filled with gratitude, but also something else, a deep sadness. She reached out weakly, grabbing his arm. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I am your enemy. You could have left me to die." "Why?" Eric sat down next to her, feeling a mix of confusion and compassion. He wasn't sure how to explain why he had chosen to save her. He had always been taught that the enemy was the enemy, that there was no room for kindness. But when he looked at Aurelius, he didn't see an enemy. He saw a person, a woman who had been caught in a war not of her making. "I couldn't leave you behind," Eric said softly. "You're not just a soldier in a war. You're someone who deserves to be saved." Aurelius blinked, her expression softening. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her body made her stop. "I don't understand," she said quietly. "My people, they have no compassion, they have no mercy, and yet you show me both." "Why?" Eric looked at her, his heart aching. He didn't have all the answers. All he knew was that something had changed inside him when he saw her. She wasn't like the Valorians he had heard about. Their empire was known for its cruelty and its thirst for power. But Aurelius, she was different. She wasn't just a soldier. She was a person with hopes, fears, and dreams. "I guess it's because I believe in something more than just fighting," Eric said. "We're not just soldiers. We're people. We have to look out for each other." Aurelius's eyes filled, with tears again, but this time they were different. They were not tears of pain or fear, but tears of wonder. She had never heard anything like this before. To her, the world had always been about power, about survival at any cost. She had been raised to believe that mercy was a weakness, that compassion was something to be avoided. "I don't know how to be kind," Aurelius whispered. "I was trained to be strong, to lead my people, to destroy enemies. But now, I don't know who I am anymore." Eric's heart went out to her. He had never been in her position, never had to face the kind of choices she had made. But he knew that deep inside, there was still something human in her, something that wanted peace, something that wanted to be understood. "You're more than just your past," Eric said gently. "You don't have to be a soldier. You don't have to follow orders from people who don't care about you. You have a choice." Aurelius's gaze was distant, as if she were thinking about everything she had been through. Her life had been full of conflict and duty, but now, with Eric's words echoing in her mind, she started to question everything. Do you think my people could ever change?" she asked, her voice uncertain. Eric didn't answer right away. He had seen the cruelty of the Valorian Empire firsthand. He had watched them invade peaceful worlds and destroy everything in their path. He had been trained to fight them, to kill them. But now, sitting here with Aurelius, he wasn't sure if it was that simple. "I don't know," Eric said slowly, "but I believe that people can change, even the worst of them. It might take time, but it's possible. You could help them see things differently." Aurelius stared at him as if trying to understand what he meant. She had been taught that weakness was the enemy, but now she saw something different in Eric's eyes. Hope, kindness, understanding. "I don't know if I can change anything," Aurelius said softly, "but I want to try." Eric smiled, feeling a glimmer of hope himself. They were from two different worlds, two different enemies, but somehow in that moment, they understood each other. It was a small step, but it was a step toward something better. Mia, who had been quietly listening from the other side of the cave, walked over. "We need to keep moving soon," she said, her tone practical. "But for now, you're safe here." Aurelius looked up at Mia, her expression guarded. "Thank you," she said quietly, her voice still shaky from the earlier emotions. Mia nodded but said nothing more. She didn't trust Aurelius completely yet, and she wasn't sure if she ever would. But Eric had made his choice, and for now, Mia would respect it. Eric turned back to Aurelius. "We're not done yet. We have a long road ahead of us." Aurelius nodded, though it was clear that the weight of her past was still heavy on her shoulders. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like there might be hope. She wasn't just a warrior anymore. She was someone who could make a difference, and maybe, just maybe, Eric's belief in her was the first step toward a new future, one where kindness wasn't a weakness, but a strength. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty. The resistance base they had reached was well hidden beneath the rubble of a long-abandoned city. It was a place few dared to venture, and for good reason. Valorian patrols constantly scoured the region for anyone who defied the Empire. But inside the base, it was quieter than expected. The small group of resistance fighters were working tirelessly to hold on, trying to survive each day in the hopes that one day they would break free from the Valorian oppression. Aurelius had become an unexpected addition to the group. Eric and Mia had kept her presence a secret for as long as possible, but eventually her skills could not be hidden. She had been raised as a warrior princess, trained in the arts of combat and leadership, but even with all her strength, her heart was not in the fight anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cracked walls of their base, Aurelis stood in the war room with Eric, Mia, and a few other resistance leaders. They had gathered to discuss their next move. Aurelis, despite her reluctance, was beginning to realize that her knowledge of the Valorian military tactics was invaluable. She had been trained to command, to lead armies, skills that the humans had never had access to. She had the power to turn the tide of battle, yet with each plan, with each decision, a nagging feeling settled in her chest. "I don't know if I can do this," she muttered, her silver eyes clouded with doubt. She sat at the table, pushing aside a data pad that displayed maps of the region. "I was never meant to be a rebel. I was meant to conquer, to lead my people to victory." Eric stood by her side, his presence a quiet comfort. "You are leading now, Aurelis," he said softly, "but this is different. You're not fighting to conquer, you're fighting to protect." Aurelis didn't respond. She knew Eric was right, but the weight of her past clung to her. How could she fight against her own people, her own blood, the ones who had raised her to be a leader of war? How could she trust herself when she had been raised to see kindness as weakness? Mia, ever the realist, crossed her arms. "We can't afford hesitation. You have skills, Aurelis. Your people trust you. Use that. If we can get them on our side, we might have a chance." Aurelis looked up at her. "But what if they never trust me again? What if they think I'm weak?" Mia's expression softened. "You're not weak for wanting peace. You're not weak for wanting to stop the killing. That's the strength we need. And that's why we're with you." Aurelis took a deep breath. Mia's words resonated within her, but they also brought a bitter taste to her mouth. She was being asked to lead a rebellion, to betray everything she had ever known. But for the first time in her life, the possibility of peace felt real. The meeting continued, and Aurelis found herself contributing more and more, offering tactical suggestions, even coming up with a plan to sabotage a key Valorian supply line. Her leadership came naturally, even if her heart wasn't fully in it yet. She was a born leader. The question remained whether she could truly lead these people toward victory, or whether her past would haunt her forever. Later that evening, Eric found Aurelis sitting alone in a quiet corner of the base, staring out at the stars through a cracked window. The stars had always been a source of comfort to her, a reminder of her people's vast empire. But now, they seemed distant, cold. "Hey," Eric said, sitting down beside her. "You're not alone in this." Aurelis turned to look at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "I don't know what I'm doing, Eric. I feel like I'm betraying everything I was raised to believe in." "You're not betraying anything," Eric said gently. "You're just choosing a different path, a better path." Aurelis shook her head. "But it's not that simple. I was taught to fight, to conquer, to see enemies as less than us. I can't just forget all of that." "You don't have to forget it," Eric replied. "But you can change it. You can lead in a way that helps everyone, not just your people. The past doesn't define you unless you let it." Aurelis looked at Eric, her heart heavy with emotions she wasn't sure how to express. "I've never had anyone tell me that before. Not like that." "I've got your back," Eric said with a small smile. "Whatever you decide, we're in this together." Aurelis's lips twitched, as if she were trying to form a smile but wasn't sure if she could. She wanted to believe Eric. She wanted to believe in herself. For the first time in a long time, she felt like there was hope. The next day, they launched the plan to sabotage the Valorian supply line. It was risky, but Aurelis's tactical insight proved invaluable. She had been right. The Valorians were vulnerable in ways they hadn't expected. Their forces were spread thin, and a small strike could cause major damage. As they approached the target, Aurelis and Eric worked side by side, their teamwork seamless. There was no hesitation in Aurelis. Now! She had embraced her role as a leader, one who didn't fight to conquer, but to protect. The mission was a success, and the Valorians were forced to retreat, their supply lines severely damaged. Afterward, as they returned to the base, Aurelis stood with Eric on the edge of the camp, looking out over the horizon. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. She still had doubts, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't fighting for her people alone anymore. She was fighting for everyone, and that made all the difference. "I think I'm starting to understand," Aurelis said quietly. Eric looked at her, his eyes full of hope. "What do you mean?" "Maybe there's more to leadership than just winning," Aurelis said, her voice steady. "Maybe it's about showing others the way, about choosing to fight for something better." Eric smiled. "I knew you'd get it." For the first time in a long time, Aurelis felt a sense of peace. She wasn't just a princess of a dying empire. She was a leader of a new hope. The tension in the resistance base was thick. After the successful sabotage of the Valorian supply line, spirits were high, but everyone knew it was only a temporary victory. The Valorians would retaliate, and the cost of their actions was yet to be fully realized. Aurelis sat at a table surrounded by maps and data pads, analyzing the movements of the enemy forces. She had become an essential part of the Resistance's leadership, offering strategies and insights into the Valorian Empire that no one else could provide. But even as the humans celebrated the small victory, Aurelis couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. She had lived long enough in the shadow of war to know that the enemy would not take this attack lightly. The Valorians were ruthless, and their retaliation would come swiftly. Aurelis looked up from the map, her silver eyes scanning the room. She could see the concern in Eric's face as he entered the room, his usual calm demeanor replaced with urgency. "We need to talk," Eric said, his voice low. "The Valorians know it was us. They're coming." Aurelis's heart sank, but she quickly regained her composure. "How soon?" "Sooner than we expected," Eric replied, pulling up a data screen to show her the enemy's movements. "They've already mobilized a full battalion. We're going to have to move fast." The resistance leaders gathered around, each of them tense but focused. Aurelis felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The choice was hers now. She had to make a decision: stay and fight or run and regroup. Her people, the Valorians, would show no mercy, and yet there was a part of her that felt a strange sense of resolve. She wasn't fighting for power anymore. She was fighting for something greater: peace, freedom, and the chance for a new beginning. "We fight," Aurelis said, her voice steady. "We use what we have. We know the land. We know their weaknesses. This isn't just about holding our ground. This is about showing them that we won't back down." The other resistance members nodded, and the planning began. Aurelis took charge, her leadership skills shining through as she coordinated the defense. Eric and Mia were by her side, assisting with the logistics and preparing the soldiers. They all worked together, each person playing their part, but it was clear that Aurelis's presence gave them a new sense of purpose. She had proven herself to them, and now they believed in her. As night fell, the base went into lockdown. Weapons were checked, supplies were organized, and the soldiers took their positions. Aurelis stood at the front of the base, looking out at the horizon. The stars above seemed distant, cold. She had once looked at those same stars with pride, thinking of the Valorian Empire's vast reach, but now they felt like a reminder of everything she was trying to escape. Eric joined her, standing quietly by her side. "You've done everything you can," he said softly. "Now we wait." Aurelis nodded, her gaze never leaving the horizon. "I've never been good at waiting." Eric smiled faintly. "None of us are. But you've led us this far. You don't have to carry the weight alone." For a moment, Aurelis didn't speak. She appreciated Eric's words, but the burden she carried was heavy. The war, the pain, the lives lost, it was all on her now. And though she had come to care for these people, the question lingered in her mind. Could she lead them to victory? Could she defeat the very empire she had once served? As she was lost in her thoughts, a sudden explosion shook the ground beneath them. The entire base rocked, and the sound of weapons fire echoed in the distance. "It's begun," Aurelis said, her voice tight with determination. Without another word, she turned and sprinted toward the command center with Eric and Mia close behind her. The Valorians had arrived faster than expected, launching an all-out assault. The battle for the Resistance's survival had begun. Aurelis quickly took charge, directing the soldiers to their positions and giving them their orders. The Resistance had set up traps and barricades, but it wasn't enough to stop the full force of the Valorian army. Aurelis had known this would be a fight to the end, but she refused to give in. She wouldn't let her people die without a chance. Eric was at her side, moving swiftly through the chaos, his focus on the task at hand. Mia was with another group providing cover fire. Aurelis had never been more grateful for their presence. They were not just allies anymore. They were friends, people who had come to trust her, despite the differences between them. In the middle of the battlefield, as explosions erupted around them, Aurelis found herself face to face with a Valorian. "Commander?" The commander was a tall, imposing figure, his armor gleaming in the firelight. He sneered as he looked at her, his voice cold and filled with contempt. "You think you can betray your people and live?" the commander spat. "You'll die like the traitor you are." Aurelis stood tall, her body tense, ready for the fight. The commander's words stung, but they also fueled something inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time: defiance. "I'm not a traitor," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the noise of the battle. "I'm fighting for something better. I'm fighting for peace." With that, she lunged at the commander, her blade flashing through the air. The two clashed in a fierce duel, each blow filled with the weight of their pasts. Aurelis's movements were fluid, precise. She was a warrior, trained for this moment. But it was not just her training that made her strong. It was her conviction, her belief that she could make a difference. The battle raged on, and the Resistance fought valiantly. Despite their small numbers, they held their ground. And through it all, Aurelis fought with everything she had, not just for her people, but for the chance at a better future. As the hours passed, the Valorians began to retreat. The Resistance had held them off, barely, but enough to send a message. They were not broken. They were not afraid. Exhausted but triumphant, Aurelis stood among her soldiers, her chest heaving as she looked at the battlefield. The price of victory had been high, but they had won. For now, at least, they had survived. Eric approached her, his face smeared with dirt and blood, but his smile genuine. "You did it. We did it." Aurelis nodded, but her eyes were distant. "It's not over. We've only just begun." And as the sun began to rise, casting a warm glow over the battlefield, Aurelis knew that the path ahead would be difficult. But for the first time in a long time, she was ready to walk it. With her new family, her new allies, by her side, she believed that change was possible, and that was all she needed to keep fighting. The aftermath of the battle left the Resistance in a fragile state. The base was badly damaged, and several fighters had been wounded or killed. But against all odds, they had won. The Valorians had retreated, their forces disorganized and in chaos. The victory was significant, but it came at a steep price. For Aurelis, the cost of leadership had never been clearer. She had seen the fear and pain in the eyes of the people she was trying to protect, and it weighed on her deeply. Now, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows over the makeshift medical tents and shelters, Aurelis sat alone in the command center. She had always known the responsibility of leadership, but now it felt heavier than ever. She could still hear the voices of the soldiers, the crackle of radio transmissions, the echo of gunfire. But now, there was a different sound in the air. Hope. Eric entered the room, his expression serious but calm. He had been helping coordinate the cleanup efforts and had ensured that the wounded were taken care of. When he saw Aurelius, sitting quietly, staring at the map of the region that was spread out before her, he knew she needed a moment of peace. But he also knew that the time for rest would have to wait. "Hey," he said softly, walking over to her. "How are you holding up?" Aurelius didn't immediately respond. She looked at the map, her mind spinning with plans and strategies. She was used to thinking in terms of battles and war, but now it felt different. She had seen the humans, her allies, fighting not for glory, but for survival. They weren't warriors. They were people just like her. And that realization made her question everything she had been taught. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words felt hollow. She sighed, her fingers tracing the lines on the map. "But I don't know what comes next, Eric. I've led armies before, but I've never fought for something like this. I don't know if I'm the right person to lead them." Eric pulled up a chair beside her, sitting down with a sigh. "Aurelius, you're the only one who can lead them. You've got more experience than anyone else here, and you've proven yourself. You know the Valorians better than any of us. But more than that, you've shown us who you really are. You're not just a princess anymore. You're a leader who fights for peace." Aurelius looked at him, her expression unreadable. "I don't know if I can ever escape who I was," she whispered, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Every decision I make feels like I'm betraying my own people. I was trained to conquer, to destroy. How can I ever undo that?" Eric placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and reassuring. "You don't have to undo it, Aurelius. You're not the person you were. You've changed. We've all changed. And we can't undo the past, but we can choose to build something better from it." Aurelius looked down, her eyes filled with emotion. She had spent so many years fighting for her empire, never questioning the reasons behind the wars she had fought. But now, standing here with Eric, with these people who had accepted her, she felt a sense of purpose that she had never known before. She was no longer fighting for conquest. She was fighting for a future, for the chance to make things right. "You're right," she said finally, her voice steadying. "I can't change what's been done, but I can choose to fight for something new, and I'll fight with everything I have to make sure we have a future." Eric smiled, proud of the strength he saw in her. "That's all we need, Aurelius. We need someone who believes in something better, and we need you." The next day, the resistance gathered to plan their next move. Aurelius stood at the front of the room, her eyes scanning the faces of the soldiers. There was a fire in their eyes, a determination that had not been there before. She had shown them a new path, and they were ready to follow her. "The Valorians will come for us again," Aurelius began, her voice strong. "But this time, we won't just defend ourselves. We will take the fight to them. We will show them that we are not afraid, that we will never bow to their empire again." There was a murmur of agreement in the room. The soldiers were ready. They had seen what Aurelius could do, and they had come to trust her as their leader. "We don't fight for revenge," Aurelius continued. "We fight for freedom, for the chance to live without fear, and for the future of our people, human and Valorian alike." Eric stood by her side, watching as the resistance rallied around her. It was a sight he had never imagined. A former princess of the Valorian Empire leading a group of humans and defectors against her own people. But in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the fight ahead, the fight for a new future. "We'll start small," Aurelius said. "We'll hit their supply lines, disrupt their communications, and weaken their hold on this planet. We don't have the numbers to face them head-on, but we have something they don't: the will to keep fighting." As the meeting continued, Aurelius felt a sense of purpose she had never known. She was no longer a princess bound by duty to her empire. She was a leader fighting for the freedom of all those who had suffered under the Valorian rule. And for the first time, she felt like she was finally where she was meant to be. After the meeting, Eric walked with Aurelis outside the base, the night air cool against their skin. The stars above seemed less distant now, more like a reminder of what they could achieve. "You're ready," Eric said quietly, glancing at her. "You've always been ready. You just had to believe in yourself." Aurelis smiled softly. "Maybe I needed someone to show me that I could be more than just a soldier." "You're not just a soldier," Eric replied, his voice full of conviction. "You're a leader." And as Aurelis looked out at the horizon, she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength and courage she had found within herself. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for hope. The days that followed were filled with preparation. Aurelis's plan was risky, but it was the best chance the resistance had. The Valorian forces were still regrouping after their failed assault, but they wouldn't stay down for long. The fight ahead would be even more intense, and Aurelis knew that this time they would be facing everything the Valorians had left. The resistance base had become a hive of activity. Every person, no matter their role, was focused on the mission. Weapons were being cleaned and checked. Supplies were being distributed. Maps and data were studied, and every soldier was prepared for what lay ahead. Aurelis moved through the base, talking to the fighters, giving them words of encouragement, but always with the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. She knew this would be the final push, the moment that would decide the future of this world. Eric stayed close to her, as he always had. He was her trusted ally, and together they had formed an unshakable bond. They had shared countless battles and moments of doubt, but now they were united with a common purpose: to end the Valorian Empire's hold on the planet, and to give everyone, human and Valorian alike, a chance at peace. One evening, as the sun set and cast long shadows over the camp, Aurelis stood on the edge of the base, staring at the horizon. She could feel the weight of the decision ahead. The attack would begin at dawn, and once it started, there would be no turning back. The plan was simple but daring. They would infiltrate the Valorian command center, disable their communications, and create chaos within their ranks. If they succeeded, they would cripple the Valorian forces and give the resistance a fighting chance. "Ready?" Eric's voice broke through her thoughts. Aurelis turned to face him, offering a faint smile. "I think I've been ready for this since the moment I decided to fight for something better." Eric stepped closer, his expression serious. "You've got this. We all believe in you." She nodded, but the doubt in her heart still lingered. She had never been a part of a rebellion before. She had never been on the side of the oppressed. Her entire life had been spent serving an empire that crushed anyone who stood against it. But now, she had seen the strength of the humans, the courage they carried, and the way they fought for something greater than themselves. And now, they were fighting with her. They were fighting for a future where peace, not war, was the rule. The night passed slowly, and as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, the attack began. Aurelis stood at the front of the group, her heart pounding in her chest. The soldiers had gathered in formation, their faces grim but determined. She had led them this far, and now they were ready to follow her into the heart of enemy territory. The journey to the Valorian command center was treacherous. The landscape was full of traps, surveillance systems, and patrols. Aurelis used every ounce of her knowledge to navigate through the dangerous terrain, her leadership and tactics guiding the group forward. As they neared the command center, the tension was palpable. The enemy was close, and they could hear the sounds of Valorian soldiers patrolling nearby. Aurelis motioned for the group to halt, and she crouched low, surveying the area ahead. "We need to take out their communications tower," she whispered. "Once that's done, the Valorians won't be able to call for reinforcements. We'll have our window of opportunity." Eric nodded, his expression focused. "We'll follow your lead." Aurelius led the way, her movements silent and precise. They made their way past the Valorian guards, using the cover of shadows and the terrain to stay out of sight. When they reached the communications tower, Aurelius gave the signal. A small group of resistance fighters moved forward, planting explosives, around the base of the tower. 5 minutes, Aurelius said quietly. "Once it goes off, we move in. Take out their command structure and disrupt their troops." The resistance fighters worked quickly, setting the charges and preparing for the next phase. Aurelius's heart raced. This was the moment they had been fighting for. If they succeeded, the Valorian Empire's control over the planet would be shattered. If they failed, well, there would be no second chances. The countdown began. As the timer reached 0, the communications tower exploded in a burst of fire and smoke. The shockwave reverberated through the ground, and the Valorian soldiers around the compound scrambled in confusion. "Now!" Aurelius shouted, and the resistance. Fighters surged forward. They stormed the compound, moving with the precision of a well-oiled machine. Aurelius led the charge, her weapon raised, cutting through the enemy soldiers with a mix of speed and skill. She had never been more sure of herself in her life. This was not about revenge. It was about freedom. The battle inside the command center was fierce, but the Valorians were disorganized, their command structure thrown into chaos. Aurelius and her team worked quickly, dismantling their defenses and taking control of key areas. Eric was by her side, covering her back as she moved forward with the resistance fighters. In the heart of the command center, Aurelius faced the Valorian commander who had once led the assault against the resistance. His armor was damaged, and his eyes were filled with anger as he looked at her. "You," he hissed. "You think you can defeat the might of the Valorian Empire. You are nothing." Aurelius stepped forward, her voice cold and steady. "I'm not trying to defeat the Empire. I'm trying to give people a chance to live without fear." "And you've lost." With that, she struck, her blade slicing through the commander's defenses. The fight was over. The Valorians had been defeated. As the dust settled, Aurelius stood, in the center of the command room, breathing heavily, but victorious. The battle was won. The resistance had succeeded. Eric walked over, his face breaking into a relieved smile. "We did it!" Aurelius looked around at the shattered command center, the smoke still rising from the wreckage of the communications tower. "We did. But it's only the beginning." The Valorian Empire had fallen. The planet was free. Aurelius turned to the soldiers behind her, her voice full of conviction. "This is just the start of a new world. A world where we fight for each other, not against each other. A world where peace is our future." And with that, Aurelius knew that the war was over. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it was a path they could all walk together.